Okay, so what we're going to have a look at today is using the trigonometric ratios which we had a look at last week, in terms of labelling the size of your triangle and then selecting your ratio, and today we're actually going to use that to be able to calculate side lengths. So question 1, we've got a triangle here, we've got the angle and we've got a side that we're looking for, and we know this side here. So the first thing we're going to do is label the sides, and if I do that, the side opposite the angle is opposite. The longest side, which is always opposite the right angle, is the hypotenuse, and the side between the angle we know and the right angle is the adjacent. Then I'm going to write out SOHCAHTOA and determine the ratio. Okay, so this is just the order of the things you'll do things. So I'll write SOHCAHTOA here, and then we will tick off what we know. So we know the angle, which means I can tick off sine, cos and tan. We know the hypotenuse, so I can tick off h, and we're looking for the opposite, so I can tick off the opposite as well. So the only ratio where I've got all three things ticked off is this one here, so I'm going to need to use sine. Now, SO is written like that because that means sine of the angle, which I'll write as theta, so that just means sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. And now we can just substitute in the values that we know. So, using this equation here, sine of the angle, where the angle is 30, so sine 30 is equal to, the opposite is x, so I'm just going to write that as x, divided by, and the hypotenuse is 10, so x divided by 10. Now I want to find out what x is. So I need to eliminate this 10 on the denominator, and this is the same as x divided by 10. So remember, to get x by itself, we need to do the opposite of what's happening to it. So we need to times both sides by 10. And what we'd end up with there is 10 times sine 30 is equal to x. And then if you get your calculator, 10 times, and then just use your sine button and brackets will automatically open. So sine of 30, close the brackets, and that is equal to 5. So x is equal to 5. Our units are in centimetres, so x is 5 centimetres. Okay. Using that example, have a go at the your turn question. Even if you only do the first couple of steps of labelling the sides and choosing the ratio, you do that first, and then come back and we'll quickly run through it before you have a practice. Okay, so hopefully you have now had a go at this one. So the first thing we're going to do is label the sides. So opposite the angle is the opposite, the longer side, which is opposite the right angle, is the hypotenuse, and the side between the right angle and the angle is the adjacent. Next, we'll write out SOHCAHTOA, and then I'll tick off what I know. So I know the angle, so I can tick off sine, cos and tan. I know the hypotenuse, so I can tick off h. And in this case, I'm looking for the adjacent, so I can tick off a. And now the only ratio with all three things ticked off is this one here, so I'm going to need to use cos. So cos of the angle, which I'll write as theta, is equal to the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. And then I can just substitute in the values that I know. So cos, and my angle is 30 degrees, so cos of 30 is equal to x divided by, and the hypotenuse is again equal to 10. So now to isolate x, I want to times both sides by 10. times cos 30 is equal to x. So on your calculator you've got 10 times, and then you're using your cos button here, so cos of 30, close the brackets, and that is equal to 5 root 3, which if you press your SD button is equal to 8.7 centimetres, rounding there to 1 decimal place. Okay, so that is your value of x. What I'd like you to have a go at now are these questions here. So using those examples, have a go at questions 1, 2 and 3. I will record work solutions to them so that you have sort of more examples, but have a go at them first before you watch that. And then once you've done that, there are some further questions for you to practice on slide 9. Okay, so running through these ones here. Question 1, if we label the sides, we've got opposite, hypotenuse and adjacent. If I show my workings here, if we write out SOHCAHTOA and tick off what we know the angle, so we can tick off sine, cos and tan. We know the hypotenuse, and in this case we are looking for the opposite, so we're going to need to use sine. So sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse, which means that sine of 30 is equal to, now the opposite we can write as x, divided by, and the hypotenuse is 12. So now to get x by itself, we need to eliminate this 12 from the bottom, so we need to times both sides by 12. So we've got 12 times sine 30 is equal to x, which means 12 times sine 30 is equal to 6 centimetres. So on question 1 you should have got 6 centimetres using those steps. Question 2, if we label the sides, again we've got the opposite, the hypotenuse and the adjacent. So if we write out SOHCAHTOA, we know the angle, so we can tick off sine, cos and tan. We know the hypotenuse, and we're again looking for the opposite, so we are again going to need to use sine. So sine of theta is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse, which means that sine of 30 is equal to x divided by 16. Now here we've got 16 in the denominator, so to eliminate that, times both sides by 16. And here, if you do 16 times sine of 30, you would get an answer of 8 centimetres. Okay, question 3, I'll do in red in the box here. So opposite the right angle is the hypotenuse, opposite the angle here is x, and then here is the adjacent. So writing out SOHCAHTOA, we know the angle, so sine, cos and tan we know the hypotenuse, and we are looking for the opposite. So again in this case we are going to need to use sine. So sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So that means sine of 60 is equal to x divided by 32, and if we times both sides here by 32, see on your calculator we've got 32 times sine of 60, and that will give you an answer of 16 root 3, which if you press the SD button gives you 27.7, and your units here is in metres. And so either of those values there would be fine as your answer. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of showing each of the steps. So what I'd now like you to do is practice the 10 questions on slide 9 and mark your work before the end of the lesson.